Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Good evening and happy Dr. King Day. Welcome to a WHUR WHUT-TV special edition of the Daily Drum for Monday, January 16th, 2023. I'm Harold Fisher. Now, we've heard the stories about Dr. King and his fight for civil rights, but the fight for civil rights is not stagnant. It continues today with new blood and new life. When it comes to carrying on the legacy of Dr. King, who is leading the movement? Or is a leader necessary? Well, tonight we're asking the question, who's got next? Millennials and Gen Zs taking up the social justice banner. For the next hour, we'll hear from a variety of thought leaders, activists, and elected officials. Now, we begin with understanding the history. And joining me in studio is Howard University Afro-American Studies Professor Dr. Greg Carr. Dr. Greg Carr, thank you so much for joining me. It's always good to have you on the program.
Always good to be with you, Fish, and with HUR and HUT family worldwide.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's first talk about where we are right now. It's been 55 years since the assassination of Dr. King, and when we talk about his legacy, what do you believe are the key elements of his long journey that changed America?
Well, the beautiful thing about Martin King is that he left us his legacy. He left us his blueprint. He left us his testament. That's why I brought a couple of books that I suggest people read. One is his book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, where he lays out a program for universal basic income, for housing, for education, employment. Everything is there. And he talks about white liberals turning their backs, black folk having internal debates on black power. All that is in the book, and it was published just after he passed. And then there's Vincent Harding, his friend Vincent Harding, who helped him write the Why I Oppose the War in Vietnam speech in '67, who wrote a book called Martin Luther King, the Inconvenient Hero. And he reminds us that King said there are three threats facing America: militarism, extreme materialism, and racism. He says these are the systemic problems, and what the civil rights movement revealed is it isn't just about a problem of discrimination. This is a problem of systems, and America has to have a revolution of values.
And those are the intellectual values that he set forth for America. But there were optics also.
Yes.
The marching, the protests, the nonviolence, the collaboration. Talk to me a little bit about that.
That's a great observation, Harold. And Vincent Harding talks about this. In fact, he wrote this book about 20 years after the assassination. He was very disturbed. He says, now we're going to have a national holiday, but we have to understand that after he gave that I Have a Dream speech in August '63, in many ways, the response to that speech happened in Birmingham the next month when those 6 black children, 4 girls and 2 boys, were murdered. That was very much a response to King's vision. And between 1963 and when he was assassinated in '68, you have Freedom Summer, where he tried to convince the Mississippi Freedom Democrats to take just 2 seats at the Democratic National Convention, and they rejected it. That shaped King. He said, I can't really be negotiating with these politicians like that. There was the Black Power movement, the March in Mississippi, the Meredith March Against Fear in '66, where these young people pushed back, and he said, I've got to think about Black Power very seriously. The Watts Rebellion in '65, after the Selma to Montgomery March, where he said, we can't keep sending these young men to Vietnam, and I'm not talking about that. That leads to him going north into Chicago and facing urban housing segregation and racism. He says this is a much more intractable thing than fire hoses and dogs in the South. And then, of course, '67 and '68. By then, Malcolm is dead. Malcolm went to Selma to meet with King. He was in jail, but Malcolm talked to Coretta, and they were going to put together an alliance. But by '67 and '68, the Americans in Vietnam, and King has been profoundly changed. This Nobel laureate said, I must now go beyond America. And at that point, he's got a target on his head. The white liberals have fled. Many of the black middle class have turned on him as well. He's kind of out there on his own. And I think that's some of the personal things that shape him and the things we don't talk about when we freeze him in time on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963.
Real quick, when you reflect back on his legacy, what's the thing that is most prominent for you?
If I had to say one thing on a WHUR and HUT network globally, I would say black institutions. This man was the son, the grandson, the great-grandson of black preachers, raised in black churches. He went to a black institution, Morehouse, that shaped him. Benjamin Elijah Mage, who was on this faculty for years before he became the president of Morehouse. His whole life, his world message is grounded in our institutions, and we must never lose sight of the fact, particularly for our young people, that we must surround them and train them, and then we turn them loose, and they change the world. Martin King is evidence of that.
Dr. Carr, thank you so much for that look back. Now, America has come a long way, particularly when we talk about black elected leaders. Now, arguably, without the work of Dr. King and others, the seats those elected leaders now hold would not be possible. Now, that brings us to today. We had an opportunity to sit down with two powerful congressional leaders to ask them about how they view where we are today with civil rights and social justice. We hear from California Congresswoman Maxine Waters and Maryland Congressman Kweisi Mfume.
When we talk about where we're going and how we move forward, yes, Black Lives Matter is extraordinarily important. And they took on the confrontation for justice and fairness in a way that even the civil rights movement did not do. The civil rights movement took it on where it was completely confrontation, but it was with nonviolence, and it was a confrontation that helped to elevate the issues and confront the domestic terrorists, et cetera, et cetera. The civil rights movement marched, and they prayed, and they petitioned their elected officials. They forced legislation through harassing practically in a very respectful way the elected officials who had the responsibility for creating legislation, affairs, and justice. So we all must do it in whatever ways that we can. Many of our young people now talk about, what are we going to do to close the wealth gap? And that's on the minds of not only millennials, but others who see the financial situation is such that we have been robbed of our ability to have wealth. And that's what the reparations movement is all about. And so whether it's reparations, Black Lives Matter, or constant confrontations, we must all be a part of it. That's what Dr. Martin Luther King wanted.
I'm very, very encouraged. We have a Gen Xer who will be sworn into Congress in just 2 weeks, Maxwell Frost, who's going to come in here and do great, great things. I think it signals the change of a lot of things that have come about as a result of a lot of different movements, like you said. Organizations today are more diversified. Their messages are more appealing in many respects. There is no one leader or one messiah. There are a number of different avenues that are being pursued by organizations and by young people who run those organizations. The key is enduring and maintaining and being able to cobble together victories, which I think it's clear we can see there are a number of them that are already taking place. So it is very encouraging for anybody that served in this body at all for any time to see the tremendous amount of change that's taking place, the number of women, particularly younger women that are being elected. All of that, I think, bodes well for the future of the Congress and for the country. Justice ought to be non-negotiable. And when we talk about justice, it's got to be justice for everybody. I remember a time when the Justice Department in this country wouldn't even enforce basic civil rights law. The Justice Department was essentially the just ICE department. That's all Black people got from the Justice Department that we knew of in those days. And so when we talk about justice now, I think more than anything else, we've got to ask ourselves as we fight for it, are we measuring it accurately? Is it affecting and benefiting everybody? And is my justice different from your justice, or is there one set of goals and standards that we kind of measure that by, whether people are better off today, whether or not the criminal justice system is working, whether or not we're involved the way we ought to be involved. Are we taking the challenges, whether they're domestic or international, and adding what we can to correct the wrongs? So it's a huge banner, this justice banner. We all want to stand under it, as we should. We just have to protect it and not let somebody co-opt it and turn it into something that is not justice, but rather, as I said before, just ice.
Joining me now in studio are Dr. Robert Turner, reparations activist and pastor of the Empowerment Temple AME Church in Baltimore, Maryland. Also, Patrice Sultan, founder and executive director of the DC Justice Lab. Thank you both for joining the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. We know that Dr. King tried to bring everyone under one big tent. You know, that included elected officials, clergy, and other activists. Dr. Turner, what are your marching orders regarding your reparations movement?
I believe that the central issue to Black America is addressing the oldest and original sin of America. The very reason we are here is not because we chose to go through immigration. It was not because we chose to come here. We're the only demographic of people in this nation that did not choose to be here. And we have still suffered ramifications, extreme ramifications of our transportation. 12 million Africans were kidnapped and brought over here to this Western Hemisphere. We were sold and pillared, and then even after slavery, things like black codes, Jim Crow, racial terror, Black Wall Street's destruction, redlining, mass incarceration, the implementation of drugs in our community, the assassination of all of our leaders, and none of that has been repaired for. So I think that as other communities have, we should be single focused to make sure that the oldest original harm done against us is repaired for. Everything else is a consequence of what has already happened.
Patrice, from your vantage point, what does the modern civil rights movement look like to you?
Well, there are a lot of aspects of civil rights where we are still hoping for equality and equal opportunity. We can look at housing, we can look at economic justice, we can look at labor, but the only place where we're still fighting for the most basic and fundamental and literal freedom is in our criminal legal system, where we are fighting against authorized state violence, authorized caging of people, authorized kidnapping of people en masse. And for my generation, I think that is the civil rights issue that should be at the forefront of everyone's minds. We can't fix any of those other things in education, housing, or elsewhere without making sure that Black people are entitled to freedom in the way that other people are entitled to freedom in the United States.
Drill down a little bit more for me and make that plain for a lot of people, because for the millions of people who are impacted by the criminal justice system unfairly, there are a whole lot of other people who may say, I don't have that in my family. We don't have to worry about that. I am concerned about employment and fair housing and being treated fairly on the job and not abused as it relates to the color of my skin.
Yeah, it's interesting that I do still hear that rhetoric of exceptionalism, because even if we're looking at the entire American population, that is not that true anymore. We're talking about half of us have someone very close to us who have been affected.
Somebody knows somebody.
Right. And when you look at Black America, all of us know somebody who's been affected by this system. And as I think about, some of Dr. King's most famous words, about darkness not being able to drive out darkness, only light can do that, right? Hate cannot drive out hate, only light can do that. For some reason, when it comes to violence, we're still under this false impression that we can drive out violence with state violence. And we hear mass incarceration justified on the basis that it will end community violence, even though we now have decades upon decades of evidence that it is driving community violence up. And so although I agree that people do, sort of separate themselves and otherize people who are system involved, they're doing that in a way that's fictitious. We're all affected by this, whether we are victims of state violence or whether we're victims of the community violence that is being exacerbated by the way we're policed and punished in the United States.
One of the things as we look at, where we are today, and we talk about younger voices, do you feel that you are part of that young voice group, Dr. Turner?
I do, but I do that with deference to generations going before me.
Okay.
And so I'm born and raised originally from Alabama, and so I was raised.
There's a word right there. There's a word right there. Yeah. So.
Born in Tuskegee, on the campus of Tuskegee University, in the same hospital where the syphilis study was done, right? And so, although I am a quote-unquote millennial, I have a great appreciation for the sacrifices of yesteryear and the struggles of yesterday.
Mm-hmm. When we, again, as I mentioned, new voices, there are new voices that are really at the beginning stages of their political careers to affect change. Jalen Smith is the mayor of Earl, Arkansas. The 18-year-old mayor was just sworn in a few weeks ago. He is the youngest mayor in American history.
Well, I see leaders like me. I see us in more political roles, not only the mayor roles, state representatives, senators, hopefully governors, up in Washington D.C. on a national level, making a difference. And our role is to make a difference, bridge the gap between the young people and our elders, so we can get in those positions, get in those roles, to make a difference. Because a lot of elders don't want to let go of those roles because they feel like us young people are too young to do that, but we got to start somewhere. We don't want to get into those roles, 20 and 30 and 40, get in those roles when we can be in those roles right now, making a difference, moving our communities, making the United States a better place, and we want to do just that, make a difference, continue to fight for our communities, fight for the best quality of life.
18 years old. What were you doing at 18? So, right. Yeah, that's a word. So, and another voice is Crystal Oriada. She's a newly elected member of the Prince George's County Council in Maryland.
I'm so used to being an advocate with my sign, my t-shirt, jeans in the streets, fighting for something that I really believe in. And now I have a seat on the table and I have an actual vote. And so I feel a lot of responsibility for what I do with the position that the community has entrusted me with, because I have to show up, authentically myself as a Black woman, as a first generation American, as an LGBTQ plus woman, and make sure that anyone that fits in those buckets sees themselves represented in the policy, sees themselves represented in the budget that we pass. And then beyond that, what transcends, I think, all of those labels that we all hold is that making sure that the community just feels heard. Because when we strip away those things, I think fundamentally we want the same things. We want to feel safe. We want to feel seen. We want to have the ability to grow wealth and have a home and flourish and be happy. Those fundamental things don't matter what, race, religion, sexual orientation that you have. And I feel like that's the responsibility that I feel is largely on my shoulders, is ensuring that the community feels that I left it better than I received it when I went into office. I see the future, hopefully, as an opportunity where there's more people like myself that get into politics. I think for too long, politics has been seen as something dirty, like you don't want to be in politics. It's, people lie, you can't trust them. You want to be on the outside. But I think that's the lie they tell us to keep us from the seats and positions of power. So what I'm hopeful is that there's this progressive movement of people actually running for office. And I think the more seats that we hold, the more that we can do to change the fabric of what our community looks like. And I also see that activism is going to look like showing up authentically wherever you are. I think for a long time, we thought, okay, activism looked like just MLK or, Malcolm X or Nelson Mandela, but activism looks like radically being authentically yourself and creating a safe space wherever you are. And that should be in every single industry. We saw what happened in the NFL. That should happen in fashion. That should happen in media. And so what I'm excited about is seeing activism bleed through every single industry that we have, so that across the board, people feel like they can show up who they are and they can be safe in that.
Some really powerful young people. She's in her mid-30s, of course. Smith is 18. Patrice, from your own experience, I mean, you spoke obviously about what the issues are, but what do you feel your role is in this march to justice? As Dr. Turner said, certainly, giving all deference to those who have come before us. But we are talking about, who's got next? We got next. Talk to me about that.
I think there are so many important roles to play in social change, and we can't have it without people playing the many roles that are there. I see myself at this point in my life as playing a role as a guide and a builder and a visionary, so that young people who don't have to go through the demechanization that I have to as someone who's memorized all these laws and rules over decades has to do, that they can arrive authentically and radically as themselves, ask those questions why, and have the answers at their fingertips through my guidance. And so I really think every role I've played, from litigator to the policy position I'm in now, have been that of a teacher. And I think we need teachers who are not just Black but pro-Black to guide the people who really want to do this work going forward. And I'm excited to be in that role at this stage.
But that's interesting, because you said you've been operating as a teacher, but you didn't start as a teacher. What was your why to get into this fight?
I have been in this fight for racial justice since I was a small child. Mm-hmm. And it was in law school that I realized that criminal justice was really the most important issue facing my generation. And it was the thing that I found most fun to work on, to be honest with you. I liked litigating cases. I like whodunit stuff. I like investigating crime. I think it's exciting. That's why there are more television shows about criminal law than about other areas of law. It's riveting. It's sensational in a lot of different ways. And my skill set was well suited for that. But even that work was a teaching role. I was teaching the jury how to understand this evidence. I was teaching the judge what the law really meant. I was teaching my client about how this process worked. And so to transition from that to law professor, and from that to someone who writes statutes and leads a nonprofit organization, felt really natural to me. And I think embracing that teaching role and finally finding that common thread has been really liberating. And we have so many people behind me who are just as capable of teaching me things, not just people who are even younger than they are.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Turner, it shouldn't be lost on any of us listening to this conversation when we talk about the legacy of Dr. King, is that he was first a clergy person before he became this civil rights activist. And you cannot separate the role of the church from the civil rights activism. And you are right at the very nexus of that.
Yes, and I'm grateful to be in such a wonderful lineage. One of the things that happens next Monday, in addition to it being Dr. King Day, January 16th, 1865, is also the day that General William Tecumseh Sherman signed off on Sherman Field Order number 15 after he had met with 20 clergymen in Savannah, Georgia, after slavery, after emancipation. He said, what is it that we can do for you? And the preachers, and some of the preachers were also business owners as well. And they said, we don't want you to do anything for us. You give us some land and we'll do for ourselves. Mm. And so what General Sherman found, they had just confiscated some land from the Confederacy after the Civil War ended. This land was on the coast of the Carolinas, stretching from as far north as North Carolina all the way down to Georgia. He said, we have enough land to give every black family 40 acres. And when you get there, we'll give you a mule to help till your land. That order was signed off on January 16, 1865. So in addition to celebrating MLK Day on Monday, we also, a lot of black people didn't even know that because we're not taught that in school, we ought be also celebrating the promise of repair that this nation gave us that she reneged upon. It was signed off on by General War Secretary Stanton. Abraham Lincoln approved it. Then Abraham Lincoln gets shot. Andrew Johnson comes in saying, I'm not giving them Negroes anything, and we haven't seen it since. And so when because I march every month for reparations, 40 miles from Baltimore to D.C. to the White House, matter of fact. So when I march, it's 40 miles for 40 acres. So when I march this coming Monday on Martin Luther King Day, it's also, in my opinion, Reparations Day, because we're going to remind America the promise she gave us that she reneged upon. And to this day, black people are the only people in this nation that have yet to receive any compensation for their harm. And I support it for the Japanese Americans at the World War II internment camps. I support it for the indigenous Americans, and they still, in my opinion, don't get enough because this was their land, right? I support it for the Jewish Holocaust survivors, but black people, we haven't got anything, and I think it's past time that we speak up for ourselves on that.
Real quick, what do you believe is the role of the black church in the civil rights movement today? And let me just say, outside of marching.
Yeah. I think the role of the black church is to be what we've always been, as what General Sherman recognized, the true conscience of America. That conscience based in faith and not man-made law, because oftentimes man-made law can uphold oppression. Like, it was legal for people to have slaves. It was legal for people to practice Jim Crow. But the church always should help point society to an eternal law, an eternal objective set of views and values and a sense of justice. And I'm thankful to be able to rely upon that. Having the law and the Constitution in one hand and the Bible in the other.
Mm-hmm. Patrice, a final word from you.
I mean, I love just that so much of the theme of what I've heard today is about repair and is about healing after harm. And that is a lens through which I hope more people start to look at the criminal legal system as well, because it gets lost in that conversation. And we still revert back to talking about punishment and retribution and using words like consequences and accountability to mean something that they don't really mean. And so I think as we, broaden our conversation to talk about all civil rights, I hope that we can keep that focus on healing after harm when we talk about criminal justice issues in particular.
And it sounds to me as if the issue of criminal justice and certainly the black church continue to have that that bond. For some people at first blush, it may seem like these are two separate issues, but as you said, everybody knows somebody. And some of those bodies are in the church, and some could argue some of those bodies should be in the church, and some of those bodies from the church need to be in the criminal justice fight.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I want to thank both of you for being a part of this really great conversation. We are going to take a quick break. Now, when we come back, we'll continue with this WHUR WHUT-TV Martin Luther King Jr. Day special. Who's got next? Millennials and Gen Zs taking up the social justice banner.
Let nobody stop us. But we must keep moving. We must keep going. If you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But by all means, keep moving.
Joining me now are Kelsey Adams, activist for D.C. statehood, and Malik Thomas, senior pastor of Bethel AME Church in Selma, North Carolina. Also continuing the conversation with us, Dr. Robert Turner of Empowerment Temple AME Church in Baltimore. Thank you all for joining the conversation. Now, you could argue that the last two people we heard before the break are also part of the future of the civil rights movement. Let's talk about the future. And I'll start with you, Kelsey. Is it fair to compare the modern movement to yesteryear?
Hi, everybody. Hope everybody's doing great. Personally, I would say it isn't fair.
Why do you say that?
I say things are changing. And so the same problems that we faced yesterday are seemingly different today. We have new people fighting. We have new methods of fighting. And at the end of the day, sometimes we're not even fighting, but we're demanding. And so with the generational changes that have occurred since 1965 and the era of the civil rights movement, today we're becoming more artistically active. And I think we need to get into more of highlighting what new movements look like.
Mm-hmm. Is D.C. statehood, in your opinion, part of that civil rights justice fight?
Oh, yes. Statehood has been a racial justice issue since its inception. As we know, Chocolate City, or what used to be Chocolate City, 41% African-American populated city of Washington, D.C., is the only jurisdiction that it has land on the United States connected to America that has no representation in Congress. And so this is just problematic on so many levels. We're the only country in the world that the residents of its capital have no voice in its democracy. And I chuckle a bit because it's absurd that third world countries even treat their residents better than the residents are treated here in the District of Columbia.
And some would argue that Chocolate City is more like a mocha latte.
Yeah, it definitely is a mocha latte. Maybe iced on top of that now. It's not even warm anymore. So,
Pastor Thomas, same question for you. Can you compare the modern movement to yesteryear fairly?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you for having me on with such a legendary panel and with you, a legend in Black radio. But I will agree with my sibling. No, I don't think it's fair at all. Not just because the movement has changed, but because most of the comparisons are not rooted in the reality of the movement itself. Because I think the grounding argument is that somehow it stopped when King got killed. But the movement has always been in existence. And the only thing that has lacked that continuity is the desire either for a singular leader or the quest for celebrity activist ambition. And it reminds me of the story in the Bible where when Moses dies, the people mourn his death, but then the Spirit of the Lord takes the bones of Moses and buries them somewhere where nobody else can see them. And I think one of the issues that we are experiencing in the constant fight for Black liberation is that we are trying to take Moses's bones into the promised land. And it doesn't give Joshua a fair fight. It doesn't give Deborah a fair fight. And so we have to say we're grateful for what Moses, what those who have gone before, what they have done, but we cannot compare them, particularly because people like to exaggerate their involvement and their connection and what they actually saw during the movement after somebody's gone. Mm-hmm. And so, no, I don't think that is fair at all.
Kelsey, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, it isn't fair, as I was saying, to compare again today's movement to what the movement looked like prior and in the past. Today, we're much more active. We're hitting the streets with different forms of activism. We probably wouldn't be the group that you would see getting together and probably on an Underground Railroad or anything, but we will try to take, our music, we take our art, we take our leaderships, we do take our celebrities, and we use them in the spots that we feel they can make the biggest impact. Impact is what moves people, and influence is really what's driving society today.
So you're suggesting that the tactics are different, but aren't the issues still the same, whether it be it was voting rights. Now it's voting suppression. There was an issue about lynching. Some would argue now it's about state-sponsored violence. Are the issues still the same?
The issues are the same, and the issue is quite blunt and clear. The issue is that it's Black people, and that there is a government that doesn't necessarily like them.
Dr. Turner, from your perspective, do the activists of today have it, whatever the it is, to carry on the fight as it was, at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, or the bus boycott, because the world has changed significantly?
I think that it's really hard to make conclusive judgments while you're still answering the question. I'm a fan of sports, and so no one starts off the year saying this is the greatest team ever, right? You wait till you finish the season. And so I would like to wait till we finish our season to see, how future generations judge what we're doing today. But I can say just right now, we have never seen the amount of people hitting the streets as we did in the aftermath of George Floyd. We've never seen the amount. I mean, it to this day still has become the largest movement the world has ever seen, right? So that's one thing. We have never seen this many young adults actively involved as they are today in the cause for social justice. We have grown in a lot of areas in our movement, in our struggle, and in some areas we need to kind of show up. I would like, and I'm happy you have another great clergy person on, Reverend Malik. I would like to see more clergy involved as they were in yesteryear. That used to be the thing. Mm-hmm. Now it's kind of like we just let everybody else do stuff, right? So we've lost that end, but we've gained in so many other ends. And I still would say I wouldn't judge us until the season's over with.
Mm-hmm. Kelsey, I need a final word for you.
I actually wanted to answer this question.
Go ahead.
If you can ask it one more time, because I wanted to.
Well,
really get into it.
Do young people have the it that we saw 50, 60 years ago, and what does that it look like?
Well, as a young activist, wanted to go ahead and throw out some titles. I am the program director for DC Vote. I serve as the executive director for Long Live Go-Go, the managing director for Capital Bop, and community director for Legacy DC, I-71 compliant gifting shop. So it's clear that we have the tools, because
that's
I am one. That's a lot of it's. I'm pretty sure I'm doing it, if that's what we're calling it. You spoke to the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I actually walked that bridge this year for the 50th anniversary of the Jubilee March. We're doing the same things, but we're doing them 10 times better. We actually had Kamala Harris cross that bridge with us. So 50 years ago, the vice president wasn't walking with us when we were crossing that bridge. No. So I want people to really hone into the leaders that are leading these movements right now. Again, the movement does look different, but we are rooting for the same things: racial justice, voting rights, climate change, you name it. These are the same things that have been fighting for ages. And now it's clear that the young generation are the ones who are going to rise up to these calls. Speaking specifically to DC statehood, we are closer than ever to really having a voice as the 702,000 residents that are disenfranchised in D.C. It is clear that we need the rest of the country to help us in our fight. All issues need 2 senators to pass, and the senators could come from D.C. We can stop trying to change the current government, but instead we could play ball with the government that we have. We're always saying eliminate the filibuster. The filibuster could be the very thing that grants D.C. statehood. So I believe we need to start shaping these conversations so we can deter the rhetoric against ourselves and place ourselves in positions so that we are not just setting the agenda, but we're at the table making the decisions, which would call for an actual voting member in Congress.
Kelsey Adams, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, Pastor Thomas, let's talk a little bit about what has changed compared to where we are now? As you know, Kelsey just said, the tactics are different, but the issues are the same.
Yeah, so I think that just as much as our tactics have shifted, so have the tactics of those we are fighting against. And this is why it's important for us to not try to compare ourselves to our foreparents, mainly because the tactics that they faced, while some of them may be similar, are not the same. And one of the big pieces that has impacted our ability to enact political solidarity is gentrification. Gentrification is not just about economic exploitation. Of course, that is a major output of it. But one of the main ideas behind gentrification is the destabilization of political solidarity. The political solidarity, particularly that you saw in Black churches and in Black social clubs in DC, in Chicago, in Detroit, in Cleveland, Atlanta, the list goes on, that are now fragmented because of redlining in housing, landlords that were driving up rent, making sure that people were priced out of neighborhoods so that you can bring in all different types of people. And now a voting block that was spread out is now pushed asunder. And so one of the big pieces that has changed in terms of the tactics of the enemy is gentrification, which is why DC statehood, which our dear sister Patrice is advocating for, issues like fair housing, making sure that, I remember when I was a student at Howard, you could get a room in LaDroit Park on 4th Street for $700 a month. Mm-hmm. Now, $700 a month is barely going to be your light bill. And that is intentional. It's not just about getting money. It's not just about greed. It's about the maintenance of white supremacy, the maintenance of a plantation politic in the United States. And until we're able to deal with the zeitgeist, the various ways that white supremacy shows up in our world, no matter how many people can stand and have like 1 million followers on Instagram, a verified check, and we'll put "we shall overcome" during Martin Luther King Day. If we don't address all those different tactics, we're going to find ourselves in the same cycle.
You know, that's a really, fascinating consideration, Dr. Turner, because Kelsey was talking about DC statehood, and she was talking about, for example, Chocolate City. Mm-hmm. And she's a native Washingtonian. Now, I was born here, lived, up until I, went off to college, lived in this area, and she was right. It was Chocolate City. It's now the Mocha Latte. And we could and can see how the changing face of the district in relationship to housing and how expensive it is and how it has moved generations of Black families out of the District of Columbia and spread them out into the suburbs. Where you are in Baltimore, we've seen some of the same things happening in the Johns Hopkins University hospital area, where traditionally back in during the 1980s and before, many of those places were Black families, or those communities have fallen into disrepair. Now they're big and beautiful, but there has been a great deal of gentrification. Do you agree with what Pastor Thomas is saying when you talk about gentrification being yet another issue for civil rights justice to look at?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, as I stated earlier, that it is a consequence of us never having received repair from slavery, white supremacy. All of these things go together. The fact that we do not have land, the very reason that people can come in and take property, raise the value of it, and kick the tenants out. While we tenants anyway, we should have got our 40 acres and a mule, right? So the very fact that we don't have wealth, it makes you susceptible to being victimized. And that's what they know as far as white supremacists. They know as long as we can keep them vulnerable, we can keep them as our victims. D.C. is a macrocosm of black people. D.C. started off being a place that the federal government wanted to use for her own purpose. It was never meant to have a voice. Same thing with black people. We came to this country as chattel. We were never meant to have a voice. And now you want to be enfranchised, like black folks wanted to be enfranchised, and you're going to have some kickback. So that's what this system and society does. When they see you as having one role, and the role of black people was to just be chattel, and the role of D.C. was just to house the federal government, how worse of a hypocrisy is that? The very seat of the so-called first world's democracy, the people there are not enfranchised. That slaps in the face, but it is because they never intended for it to be. Now, should it be? Yes, absolutely we should have statehood in D.C., and I will continue to fight and help fight for that. But the fact that we don't have land, we're not landowners. Only 45% of black people are homeowners. 45% compared to 75 plus for white people. That's a 30% gap. 30% gap. And every home mortgage program, Wells Fargo, who's just not being sued, JP Morgan, Chase, Bank of America, they all fall short on meeting their own goals. And if we had gotten what we were supposed to have, we could be our own landowners.
So, Pastor Thomas, he's talking about economic justice, home ownership, land ownership. Whether it's those issues or others, what do you feel is your role in the modern civil rights movement as an activist?
Well, I think Dr. Turner, who I've admired for years and just recently this past year was finally able to meet, has been doing that work. And what I try to model as a pastor who is committed to Black institutions. My undergraduate degree is from Howard. My master's degree is from Virginia Union. Okay. These are intentional choices because we, after the so-called second civil rights movement ended, as they say in 1968, the chasing of vanilla suburbs twisted the ambition of the young, talented, and gifted Black folk who were coming out of our institutions. And so it wasn't about pouring back into our institutions. And let me put it like this: it wasn't about making a better place making the world a better place. It was about making for themselves a better place in the world. And so what I have decided is that I am committed to Black institutions. And I want to actually even say that the term civil rights has undergone what Cedric Robinson calls incorporation, that it has been used in so many different ways and in so many different tactics that it has almost been diluted in its meaning. And so I believe that my commitment is to restoring, and particularly as a member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is a Pan-African organization founded being inspired by the Haitian Revolution. Richard Allen making very intentional choices to do the first general conference in a slave-owning state, that I am interested in restoring a Pan-African commitment to Black liberation and not just civil rights. Because when Black folk are free, particularly Black women, Black queer folk, at the most marginalized folk, when they are free, everybody can be free. And so that's what I believe in a very general sense, building power, not trying to build my platform, not trying to build popularity, but building power, building capacity, not just what Saul Alinsky and all those other community organizers were doing, but building solid, strong political, economic, and social power so that when we show up at the State House, when we show up at the White House, when we show up at the Capitol, we have the numbers, we have the information, and we mean business.
Dr. Turner, what does the future of civil rights activism look like to you? Does it include still marching? Why or why not?
I think it has to include everything. I don't leave anything off the table. When you're in a battle and you need as much ammunition as you can get your hands on, you use it all. Marching is as old as the Bible, right? When Joshua walking around the walls of Jericho, it's a reason that right now across the world, when people want to voice their grievance, they march. The alternative of marching is violent protest. Right? And we see that. We saw that January 6th here. We see that now in Brazil. So now, if that's where America and the world is going, then we really have literally hell on our hands. So voting, protesting, petitioning your government are ways of redress in any democracy across the world. The problem now, though, is people are not consistent. That's why when the Lord spoke to me, as I did in Tulsa, to go out to City Hall every week to advocate for the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre victims and get reparations and the mass graves, and now to go to march from Baltimore to the White House every month, that's 42 miles. 40 miles, 40 acres. It takes like 14 hours in one day, right? And that consistency, this will be my 4th time doing it. Now it'll be on MLK Day, the very day, as I stated earlier, that the Sherman Field Order number 15 was signed. So consistency. Joshua and the Israelites did it 7 times for 7 days. On the 7th day, 7 times. I think that's something sometimes we lose in this social media, what's hot, what's next, what's new type of mindset.
Pastor Thomas, I've got only a few minutes left. I want you to have the final word on this issue of who's got next and the future of the civil rights movement.
Well, once again, thank you for having me. I really want to say that the important thing is education, and not just the school system, but we need to constantly, continuously tell the story. And I pay attention to it not just politically but spiritually. That the main tactic of white supremacy is the erasure of the memory of the oppressed. And so once we forget who we are, who we've been, we neglect to understand who we can be. And so that's why they're coming after critical race theory. Not because they are trying to be mean, but because they know if the story is told, particularly as now people have more information and more access to information, but if the accurate story is told, then the work that Dr. Turner was doing in Tulsa is really going to have some legs. The work that's being done in Georgia with the voting rights work is going to have some legs. The work that Patrice and so many others are doing around D.C. statehood, what Dr. Willie Wilson has been doing for years in D.C., would really have some legs. And so they want to shut the story. And if I could just wax theological for a second, we know in Revelation, it said they overcame the enemy by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of the testament.
That's right.
The blood has already been shed. It was shed by Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner. It was shed by Martin Luther King Jr. It was shed by Malcolm X. It was shed by Marcus Garvey, shed by Harriet Tubman, shed by Sojourner Truth. The blood has been shed. Now it's time for us to tell our testimony. But if we do not tell the story, and if we don't get the story right and we allow people whose main sole purpose is to cause confusion in Black liberation movements to tell our story, we allow those who have large platforms with small substance to tell the story, we will continue to believe that we are behind the 8 ball. But when we know who we really are, when we recognize we are the descendants of Jean-Jacques Dessalines and Toussaint Louverture and all these other major Black liberation folk who are ready to lay down their lives for our freedom. I think the future of civil rights, the future of Black liberation is a Pan-African one. It's one that tells a story, and it's one that recognizes that we must continue to adapt and be willing to plant seeds that will allow trees to grow whose shade we may not live long enough to enjoy.
I think that's a great place to end this part of the conversation. Gentlemen, Dr. Turner, Pastor Thomas, thank you so very much for giving us the insight and the education and reminding us about what this battle is truly about, because it is not over. So again, I want to thank you both for participating in the conversation. Also, I want to thank Kelsey Adams and Dr. Carr as well for participating in the conversation, and Patrice as well. Lots of big brain conversation folks here to give us some insight and help us move forward. I did want to say that the march along the road to civil rights justice remains a very long one. And the shoes of Dr. King are very hard, if not impossible, to fill. But 55 years after his death, that goal remains the same. but there are many more pairs of shoes and many more paths along that road. And those marching along the road are more diverse, just as vocal, and are holding up the banner. The dream is still alive because there is new, promising, vibrant leadership. They got next. That is the Daily Drum for this Monday, January 16th, 2023. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.
I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
This program was produced by WHUT and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. For more information on this program or any other program, please visit our website at WHUT.org. Thank you.